I recognize the member for Regina Wall Shakers.
Hear, hear.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's an honor for me to join into the throw-in speech today, the throw-in speech debate. I want to say thank you very much to the Leader of the Opposition for allowing the member from Newtown to speak finally. She hasn't been on her feet for a long time, and it's nice to hear a different voice over there besides the member from Massey Place.
I forgot she was there.
So, Mr. Speaker, as always, when we start these throw-in speech replies, there's a few people in my life that I need to thank that allow me to do this wonderful job and be able to represent the people of Regina Wall Shakers. First, as all of us have great constituency assistants, Heather House-Shiplack has been with me since the election of 2011, making sure I am where I need to be and I'm prepared for our meetings, our stakeholder meetings, our events throughout Regina. She does a wonderful job ensuring that the constituents that call into our office get great help right away. We've had many phone calls back about Heather's professionalism and how well she handles casework and how she gets the people in touch with the ministry people or with the information they need to make sure that their problems move along. Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, in my life, I have to thank my wife, Larissa Steinley. She is by far my greatest supporter and my greatest critic. She keeps me honest, Mr. Speaker, and whenever I need a grounding, she'll give it to me to make sure that I keep my head not from getting too big, which is a task sometimes for Mr. Speaker. And she is also the person that is my greatest support, Mr. Speaker, and she has done so much for me. She looks after our son. She's an amazing mother, something that I guess I can't thank her enough for. Our little son Nixon, 17 months old now, and she has done such a great job with him. I know all of us spend a lot of long nights here, and for me it's session time's a bit more difficult. I'm out of the house before Nixon gets up, and I'm back home on a couple days before he goes to bed, and I miss him a lot, but she is doing a wonderful job. And FaceTime's a wonderful thing. Technology is great, so every now and then we get to FaceTime and he gets to say goodnight to Daddy, and it means a lot to me to be able to do that. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, since Nixon came along, our lives have changed a bit. Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry. Since Nixon came along, our lives have changed a bit, and our perspective has changed a bit on our priorities, Mr. Speaker. And I think priorities are what the throne speech is all about. It set out the priorities of our government for this session, and I'm not surprised that our priorities differ from the members across the way, Mr. Speaker. I think that obviously we're going to set a different agenda than they will, and I understand how they are supposed to oppose some of our priorities, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to go into a few of the things that I find very, very important in our throne speech, and one obviously is the theme throughout is tied throughout all of our priorities, keeping Saskatchewan strong. And I think through everything else, Mr. Speaker, that the opposition probably can't disagree with keeping Saskatchewan strong. We're an ascending province. We're growing, Mr. Speaker. We're growing in population. We're growing in people working. That's why the amendment brought forward by the member from Rosemont was a bit confusing when his amendment was, "Now, this Assembly condemns this government for primarily working to benefit a select few while dismissing the most important things Saskatchewan families want and need, especially in the areas of health care, education, and the rising cost of living." Mr. Speaker, that's a very confusing statement because we know that in June our employment hit a record high of 577,000 people working in our province. So if there's 577,000 people working in the province of Saskatchewan, how would you be able to say that this government is just working for a select few? That doesn't make too much sense to me, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sorry. I also wonder how the opposition say we're working for a select few when our wages are the highest there have ever been in the province. So there's more people working in the province than ever before. There's more people making more money in the province than ever before, and we've had the lowest unemployment in the country for 23 consecutive months. That's probably a record. Thank you, my member from Waccamaw. So putting forward an amendment just for the sake of putting forward an amendment is a practice that the opposition used for many, many years, and I don't really understand the amendment, but I do understand how they oppose some of our priorities, because our priorities will be a lot different in the next 18 months, I believe. For example, we have a growth plan. We have a 2020 growth plan of where we want to go into the future. That would be different, because as the member from Rosemont said in his speech, of course there's an important place in our parliamentary democracy for the role of advocacy on the floor of this assembly, as well and as a role for the opposition to oppose and, yes, propose. This really struck me funny. So oppose and propose, which I totally agree, opposing and proposing is a very important role within opposition. And they have the opposing down pat. Very good. The proposing leaves a little to be desired. Like, if I was going to propose policy, I would put it on our website. If you Google, the member from Montana was a fan of Googling things during her speech. If you Google the NDP Saskatchewan website, there is no policy, there is no plan. So for the member from Rosemont to say it is very important for the opposition, the loyal official opposition, to propose policy, and then really have nothing to offer the people of Saskatchewan. Let's not forget, we're 18, possibly 12 months out from an election. So how do you go to the people of Saskatchewan, which I'm sure all the opposition did for the whole summer? I'm sure they're all out there door knocking to ensure that they maintain their seats, the 9 seats they have, hopefully.
No, they weren't.
No, oh, well, the member from Southern said no, they weren't out there at all. So, but if I was going out to go door knocking, which we did on this side of the House, I would want to put forward ideas to the people of Saskatchewan. Like, for example, I would have targets. I would have targets for population, like 1.2 million by 2020. That's a target. That's a policy with a target base. I know this is. I know the member from Massey Place was a former policy analyst, so he should know how to formulate policy. It may be just taking him a little longer than expected, Mr. Speaker. Another comment from the member from Rosemont, which the member from Rosemont's an interesting guy, and he always has a few interesting statements that he makes in his speeches, and he talks about people doing better, not the province doing better, which we'll get back to later. It doesn't make a whole bunch of sense. If your province is doing poorly, the people in the province will probably be doing poorly as well. As we saw with them for 16 years, the province wasn't doing really well, so the people weren't doing well, so they left. But the member from Rosemont, and I'll quote his speech from Thursday, and these are companies, Mr. Speaker, who have skin in the game, who have stuck through more challenging times within this province, who deserve to be part of the projects right now with workers. Interesting statement, Mr. Speaker. So the member was on a rant about a Sask First policy, which we're working on with our Sask priorities for reviewing our tendering policies. So he is very concerned that the companies within Saskatchewan deserve to be doing better right now. Well, my question would be, what would have been the more challenging times that the member from Rosemont referred to? When would there have been more challenging times? Because as the natural governing party, as they like to call themselves, I would assume that more challenging times would be further than 7 years ago. So that would probably be within the 16 years that they were in government would have been these more challenging times for the businesses that he was speaking of. And I remember this, and probably one of the better speeches that I've heard in this assembly was when the member from Cut Knife Turtleford stood up and said, "I'm a survivor. I survived the lean years as a businessman under the NDP." Very poignant words from my colleague from Cut Knife Turtleford, which we're looking forward to hearing from him again. So, Mr. Speaker, talking about these challenging times from the member from Rosemont, obviously he's talking about the times when his party, the NDP, were in power. So I guess he would feel that the socialism that they would have evoked probably was not working very well for the business people of Saskatchewan. And possibly, I remember there was a job-killing monster legislation that they brought forward too, which I think the businesses didn't really like that either. I'm not sure if that was ever really proclaimed, because I think they pulled that back right away. They didn't get through? Yeah. So I'm guessing those lean times are they talking about when the NDP would have been in power, Mr. Speaker. I would like to talk about the member from Athabasca who has been here for a long, long time on both sides of the House and for
I recognize the member for Regina Wall Shakers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I join with the member in welcoming. It's always good to have people from the public come in and take the proceedings and have a tour of their legislative building. So, Mr. Speaker, I was going to talk about the member from Athabasca for a minute or two because there's a lot of myths that I've heard from NDP members, NDP and MLA, the few NDP supporters that are in Wall Shakers when I get to knock on the doors, because it's always good to talk to everyone in Wall Shakers. NDP supporter, Green Party supporter, SAS Party supporter. It's good to learn from each and every one of them, Mr. Speaker. But I always hear this, and it's quite amazing to me to hear some of the not so factual information that may be derived. So I took a look, and I am a political nerd, Mr. Speaker, so I read the speeches from the members from Regina Rosemont and Regina Athabasca the other night just to try and learn a little bit and see what point of view they're coming from. It didn't work. I don't know where they're coming from. But, Mr. Speaker, the member from Athabasca goes, "It's a huge disappointment for many people throughout Saskatchewan. Despite giving a huge surplus, that government getting a huge surplus, a booming economy, and a growing population, Mr. Speaker, they can't figure out where they're at and what they're going to present to the people of Saskatchewan." So, Mr. Speaker, and I've heard this a lot from the member from Athabasca, the member from Rosemont, the member from Riversdale, about the huge economy that we inherited from them in 2007. And I've heard time and time again that Saskatchewan became a half province in 2003. Time and time again. Especially from the member from Athabasca and Saskatoon Riversdale. And we've had conversations about this, and she just doesn't really, I don't know, I sent her the link, so I went up onto the Government of Canada's Finance Department, because I guess if you're getting equalization payments, you're probably not a half province. You can probably make those two points and figure that out. So I have here right here, federal support to Saskatchewan from the Government of Canada. 2005-2006, equalization payments, $89 million. 2006-2007, $13 million. 2007-2008, wait a minute, 2007-2008, $226 million. So, Mr. Speaker, if you're receiving equalization payments and you're getting them from the Government of Canada, that would be, the basic assumption there would be that you're not a half province. So let's go on and see the next couple years. I wonder how much money Saskatchewan received in equalization from 2008 and 2014. Blank. Blank. Not one. So obviously the mystery can be put to rest. I can officially make the member from Athabasca aware that we were not a half province in 2003. That's guaranteed fact of life. He's going to have to come to terms with that. The next thing that he always spouts, he's like, oh yeah, there was a lineup of cars on November 11th, 2007, just waiting to come in as soon as you guys won. Because he always figures, well, there probably was, Mr. Speaker, but I don't think that's the point the member's trying to make from Athabasca. He goes, our population was growing and growing, and there was people coming to our province in spades back in 2003, 4, 5, and 6. So, like the member from Montana told us, I Googled. I Googled the Saskatchewan population from 1999 to 2008. So, which is interesting because, according to the mythical speeches of the NDP, Saskatchewan was doing awesome, and the member from Lakeview will know this for a fact, that things were just fantastic in the early 2000s, population growing, obviously a half province, which is not true. So I like the population in January 1st, 1999 was 1,016,883, over the million point. That's a pretty good target. That's kind of the magical number for Saskatchewan. January 1st, 2000, 1,011,141. That's a bit lower. So I guess we're not increasing yet. Well, wait. 2001, 1,003,469. Bit lower again. 2002, 998,728. under that magical million mark. So 2003, when the member from Athabasca and Riversdale and everyone says everything's going better now, 2003 is the time when it was our time to shine. 996,289. That would be lower. Again. So, and my colleague from SVM makes a great point, because in 2003, 2004, this is after the election, and one of their senior ministers, and this is when I was paying a bit more attention to politics when I was a younger guy, and I remember this quote specifically from the NDP. Well, I think it was Mr. Laudermilk, I believe, the economy minister. Yep. Well, and he is during his crown, well, if more people leave, that just means there's more for the rest of us. How could you ever run a province with people like that and that ideology making decisions for you? Not possible. There's more for the rest of us. That is just probably counterintuitive to any common sense you could ever have. I think the member from Wood River said it perfectly. So hold on, we're going back to the population, because eventually they say things are going to turn around under them. January 1st, 2004, 996,596. That would be lower again. 05, 995,000. That's their lowest point yet. But just wait, they can beat that. January 1st, 2006, when the economy is booming, the population is growing, according to the member from Athabasca and the other 9 over there. January 1st, 2006. 992,242 people, and that is their lowest benchmark. So, Mr. Speaker, after years and years, well, 4 years, listening to their speeches over there, talking about we inherited a booming economy, the population was growing. With 2 Google searches, you put all their myths to rest. Their population in 2006 was 992,242. Absolutely incredible. It's not like in the fall of 2007, people just suddenly realized, hey, there's oil here. Hey, there's potash here. It's always been here. But they had this idea that the more that people left, the more that would be left over for the rest of them. Not realizing that the more people left, the more they were going to raise taxes, the more they're going to drive people out. If they would have still been in power, Mr. Speaker, we'd probably be at about 500,000 people living in Saskatchewan right now. Alberta would have about another 500,000 people, Mr. Speaker. So what I came to realize is that maybe sometimes, and I don't want to be too critical of our colleagues across the way, but it really, really surprises me that they can stand there in their seats and rail about how great things were in 2000 and 2003, and then they talk to us and say, well, what have you done for 8 years? Well, it was a good farming year for a few people, the member from our River Watcher says, but Mr. Speaker, I think at some point in time you have to take a step back and take stock and say, you know, our fairy tales aren't working anymore. People probably aren't believing that things are really, really good in 2003, 4, and 5, or else we'd probably still be in government. Maybe it's time to look at some of our policies. We don't have any. Well, that's probably a bit of a problem with people. I think if you don't have any policies and you're not going to maybe take a step back and look at what some of the things you've been doing, you probably have a whole bigger issue. Mr. Speaker, all this summer was a great summer for us. The weather finally got better about June and July, and we got on the doorsteps. I think each and every member in here was on the doorsteps talking to constituents. And I was on the doorsteps in Walsh Acres too. It was a pretty good experience, obviously. And obviously everyone's not going to be happy with everything we're doing. But that's why you go out there. You go and listen to constituents and listen to what they think you're doing well and listen to what they think you can improve on. That's the part of our governance philosophy. There's always going to be more work to do, Mr. Speaker. We're not going to stand up there and talk about the glory years of when things were just magical and everything was perfect. We're going to work hard to continue to make things better for this province, continue to seek growth, Mr. Speaker, and not just for the sake of growth, but for the sake of making each and every person in Saskatchewan's quality of life better. That's why this side seeks growth, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.
So while I was door knocking in Walsh Acre, it was fantastic, got to meet constituents. But then I have a neighboring constituency, which it's going to be an interesting race come 2015, fall 2015 or spring of 2016. So I was able to go with a couple of friends, and we were door knocking in Regina Rosemont. And the member from Regina Rosemont, he stands up here and gives petitions about this, traffic on Dudney. So we wanted to go and door knock right by Dudney and see how things were going and talk to the people that were right there. How are they going? It's interesting because he's an affable young man. He says he's out and about a lot, but a lot of people really didn't even know who their MLA was. So that was a bit interesting. And but when we were talking about the traffic on Dudney, we also brought up the fact that our government's working on a couple west bypass and a couple solutions to the problem, which is weird because they said they never really got any of that information from their MLA, whoever that was, in the newsletter. Which is interesting because if you're going to stand in your spot and present petitions day after day after day, you should probably also realize that there might be some solutions coming down the pipe, Mr. Speaker. Also, when we were door knocking in Rosemont, which it was after the boundaries were redrawn, a part of the area of Regina Walsh Acres went into Rosemont, so I was able to door knock that area as well, and you wouldn't believe the reception we got on the doors in that area. People were happy to see us. They were happy with how things were going. The government, you always go and you say, well, we're here. I want to know how you feel that we're doing, what we can be doing better, and what direction you'd like to see the government go in. And after a couple of short discussions, people would say, we enjoy what you're doing. People are making more money in the province. There's a few things we appreciate the priorities you set out. You're making some commitments in healthcare. You're making some commitments in post-secondary education. What we don't want to see is you guys not in government. We don't want to go back to what the NDP were doing 8 years ago. We don't want to go back to people leaving the province. We don't want to go back to us having to pack up the van and visit our kids in Red Deer, or Calgary, or Edmonton, because we did that for 16 years and we're happy they're moving home. That's the proof, and that is when I was graduating high school in Swift Current in 2000. I get a look from a couple members. Yes, 2000 was my high school graduation. It was fantastic. You be done high school, you're excited, and then you get home and I remember from Dudney said I was 22 years old. That's factually incorrect. I was not 22 years old. I was a tall kid, but I was not 22.
So fourth-time to grade 12?
But, Mr. Speaker, you're happy, you're excited, you go to your graduation, and most of us walk through the door. Most of us walk through the door, and our parents knew that we'd be leaving, so there's a set of luggage there waiting because we're like, you don't got any opportunities to here. You might as well pack up. So that was the experience we had in high school, Mr. Speaker. We had the experience of having to leave this province to search for the quality of life that we do have here now, Mr. Speaker. And I think that's one of the biggest things the people on the doorstep have said to me, and I think many of our colleagues across Regina, across Saskatoon, that they're happy that one of the things that they're happiest about in our government's priorities is having the opportunity for the children to raise their families here, not having to leave to visit grandkids.
Here, here.
And Mr. Speaker, I think that's how you build a province. It's also through immigration, and it's through welcoming new Canadians here, Mr. Speaker, but I think at that cornerstone is ensuring that there is the opportunity for young people. And that's some of our priorities, and you saw that in one of our first budgets when we brought in the graduate retention program. And the members across can say, well, all you're doing is repeating yourselves, you're repeating yourselves. Well, Mr. Speaker, sometimes if you're doing some things well, you repeat them because they're working. And then you listen to people and listen to the priorities of the people of Saskatchewan and then adjust to make sure that you're doing those things well, Mr. Speaker. And when it comes to the graduate retention program, I think it was one of the best priorities our government set forward to ensure that young people, our talent, our best resource, our people, have the opportunity to stay in Saskatchewan, to live, to work, and to raise a family. And Mr. Speaker, I think that sets out some of the priorities that are important to us, growing our province, growing our economy, which is what we set out in this throne speech, Mr. Speaker, is that when you grow your economy, one of the most important things you have to do is grow your skilled workforce. And we realize some of the things we need to do better. We face a skilled labor shortage, Mr. Speaker. Our government has invested heavily in adult basic education services, and we're working to eliminate that wait list of the ABE. Now, in the upcoming fiscal year, we'll increase the number of ABE training seats to 775, eliminating the 2012 wait list and bringing the total number of seats to 9,355, an increase of nearly 60% since 2007. We do have some very strong priorities on education, Mr. Speaker. A few months ago, we were pleased to sign on to a Canada Job Grant agreement with the federal government. And I know this is really going to scare the opposition when you agree with the federal government, because basically their economic platform was to go and sue the Canadian government for $800 million and stay on the have-not list and try and collect welfare for 30 years and try and grow the economy that way, Mr. Speaker. That doesn't work. You have to make these agreements. You have to get along with your funding partners, be it federal, municipal, Mr. Speaker, and that's some of the things that we're focusing on. And our government is investing $15.7 million in the program, which will link training directly to the needs of employees. Mr. Speaker, if you're going to have a growing economy, you're going to have the infrastructure to support that growing economy. And this year alone, nearly $3 billion has been committed to renew and expand the province's infrastructure.
Hear, hear.
And one of the things that we fought for, Mr. Speaker, and that we were big proponents of in the City of Regina was the Regina Bypass Project, which will be the largest transportation project in Saskatchewan's history, Mr. Speaker. And that's a project where the municipal government came to play, the Building Canada Fund came to play, Mr. Speaker, and heaven forbid, it's going to be a P3. Mr. Speaker, we have to ensure that we get the most bang for our buck, so to speak, Mr. Speaker. We're going to need to leverage the dollars that we can to ensure our growing economy, the infrastructure is going to keep up with it. And if you're going to go with a blind ideology where you can't use P3s and you're going to leave money on the table, you're obviously not going to take advantage of the opportunities that is given to you, and that's why you can't be opposed to P3s, just based strictly on an ideological rant. Although, the member from Athabasca, to his credit, he probably didn't get very much credit when he went back into his caucus office, but he said you can't leave money on the table. And Mr. Speaker, I totally agree with him on that point. I don't know if his other colleagues did, but I think that's very important that at least he realized that, is that when you have the opportunity to leverage money, be it municipal, federal dollars, you have to take those opportunities, Mr. Speaker. We're also leveraging the P3s for a 225-bed Swift Current Long-Term Care Centre. It's under construction now, Mr. Speaker, and that's going to be a P3 also. And although it's a program that was very successful in our first term, it's a program we're reintroducing, which is the Saskatchewan Infrastructure Growth Initiative. And Mr. Speaker, I remember when working in this building when SIGI first came into play. It was a fantastic project, Mr. Speaker. The municipalities from all over took advantage of that, and we've actually expanded that, Mr. Speaker. Under the first iteration of SIGI, nearly $200 million in borrowing was approved, and 82 communities benefited from interest rate subsidies. Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan First Nations would also benefit from SIGI, so the program will be open to those First Nations in a position to participate. Mr. Speaker, I think this is another initiative that maybe the member from Montana said it was regurgitated, but when it went so well the first time that we rolled out SIGI, why wouldn't you roll it all again, Mr. Speaker? And SARM does like it, Mr. Speaker, and I think that there's a lot of